Hey everybody, welcome back to Shock and Schlock. I'm your host, Herschel Gillis, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, Mr. Donald Farmer, acclaimed filmmaker and one of my personal favorite filmmakers. How are you doing today, sir?
Oh, pretty good.
Good. So getting into this, just want to start out with a little bit of background, maybe for people in my audience who don't aren't aware of all of your films here. You made stuff like Demon Queen and recently the newest Debbie Does Demons, which I reviewed on my channel. I really enjoyed that one. I want to start out by just asking you what sort of inspired you to begin making films in the first place?
Well, I made my first attempt when I was 12. I made a 3 minute 8 millimeter movie with two of my neighbors. And so even, from the time I was 12, I was interested in doing it. And so I did my first one at that age. And then I picked it up again when I was 19. And when I was 19, for 3 years I did a series of Super 8 short films that range from 15 minutes to 40 minutes, and they're all released on a Blu-ray, or actually on two Blu-rays from SRS Video, the Donald Farmer Collection Volume 1 and Donald Farmer Collection Volume 2, where they collected all of my Super 8 shorts from those years. And then after I did those Super 8 shorts, I didn't do anything for 10 years. And then in 86, I started up again. And then since 86, I've done 36 features, including documentaries that I've either directed or co-directed. And Demon Queen was the first one, and Debbie Does Demons is my most recent one.
And I know that Demon Queen maybe wasn't the first shot on video film, but it was sort of in that first round of them. What would you say caused you to come back and make a feature length after such a long time away from filmmaking in general?
Well, after I did my Super 8 movies in the 70s, I just stopped doing it because back then, when you made a Super 8 film, there was really nothing you could do with it aside from showing it on your Super 8 projector to your friends and neighbors. There
Hmm.
was no distribution platforms in place for movies made in Super 8. Back then, if you made a feature and wanted it to play in theaters or drive-ins, it had to either be one of two things. It either had to be 35 millimeter or it had to be 16 millimeter blown up to 35 millimeter. And there were a few of those, like Fred Olin Ray Scalps, God's Bloody Acre, Deadly Spawn. Those were a few examples of movies shot on 16 millimeter and blown up to 35. But either one of those two choices were prohibitively expensive for somebody who didn't have access to a 5 to 6 figure budget. So it was just finances that kept me away from movies because there was nothing you could do at that time that you could monetize a Super 8 movie and make any revenue with it. It was just, strictly you're doing for the entertainment of
Hmm.
yourself and your immediate friends. You could only show it to people who lived in close enough distance to you that they could come over and watch it on your projector. So
Yeah,
it just seemed to be putting a lot of effort into something that only a tiny amount of people were going to see.
absolutely.
So why I got back into it in '86 was because of the brand new home video market where people now own these home video players, and there were now distributors that were creating product made especially for home video players. They were making movies designed not for theaters or drive-ins, but they were making movies designed for not only national but international distribution that you could make a movie now and shoot it on video and market it all over the world. Actually, my first movie, Demon Queen, was released in America, in France, Belgium, and Korea. So it was released in four countries on my first attempt. And so that's why I got back into it, because now there was a market where you could actually make money doing this and not just be wasting your time.
Absolutely. And speaking of that, what if you, some 40 films almost later, how have the sort of limitations on budget and funding for your films, how has that changed over time? I'm sure it's sort of evolved in like the era of Indiegogo and that sort of campaign crowdfunding.
Yeah, well, when I started, I self-funded or usually had one partner on my movies. With Cannibal Hookers, I had one funding partner, and we put our money together to make Cannibal Hookers. With Demon Queen, I used a unique idea I had for funding. I thought instead of going out and asking people to put money into my movies, what I would do instead was to think of the items I needed for a movie that would cost me money, and then try to find people that could provide those services either free or on a deferred basis, so that instead of asking them to give me money, I would ask them to provide the service which I otherwise would have to pay for. So on Demon Queen, I did this with my cinematographer. I needed somebody with a commercial grade video camera, not a half inch like most people had to shoot their home movies with, but with a commercial grade video camera. And back then, the main commercial grades were like 3/4 inch or Betacam were the most popular ones. And those were really expensive to have. So usually only commercial videographers own them. So I needed somebody with a camera like that so that I wouldn't have to shoot the whole movie on my own home video camera where it would really look awful. And then the second thing I needed was back then there were no editing. People didn't have laptops with editing software on them where you could self-edit anything you shot like you can today. But back then, if you wanted your footage edited, you had to go to an editing house, and it cost quite a lot of money to hire a professional commercial editor to edit your footage. So that's the other thing. This production company that I became partners with, they had all these editing facilities that otherwise would cost a lot of money. And so I got them to contribute their cinematography services and their editing services all through our partnership, and then gave them a deferred pay and then paid them out of the profits of the movie once it started making money.
For sure. What would you say is sort of like would be your biggest advice to somebody that's trying to break into filmmaking, maybe small time filmmakers like myself? What would you be your piece of advice from that on somebody working on a pretty limited budget as well?
Well, nowadays there's really hardly no any limitations at all. Filmmaking's more accessible than ever because everyone has you can shoot on your phone. Most phones you can shoot a movie on, and you can also edit with those. Pretty much everybody has a laptop that has editing software built right into it. And then it has the capability of this editing software to not only edit a complete movie in your laptop, but then to output what you've just edited onto a flash card or a hard drive memory. And that's an export device which can be accepted by most distributors who will accept a flash drive or a hard drive as a deliverable. Because when you make these movies and you try to market them, your end product has to be something that's called a deliverable that you deliver to your distributor. And in the old days, when I started, a deliverable was usually a 3/4 or a 1 inch or a beta master. But nowadays, a deliverable is like a flash stick or a hard drive. So, that's what you want. You want to be able to edit your movie and export it to one of these deliverable devices, which will be acceptable to most of these SOV distributors.
Definitely. What would you say over time as well, speaking of your prolific nature of your films and everything coming out over decades, what would you say has been sort of your own personal favorite film that you've made?
Well, I have several favorites. My second one, Cannibal Hookers, is one of my favorites. It was the first time I tried to put a lot of humor into the script, and it was the first time I had a really good director of photography. My director of photography on Demon Queen was just a functional guy, but he wasn't very creative. He was just strictly functional.
Hmm.
Whereas I had two different directors of photography on Cannibal Hookers, and they were both pretty good. Especially this one guy I had, Richard Krashansky. He had quite a resume. He had actually been a camera assistant on the TV soap opera Dark Shadows in the
Hmm.
60s. And even more impressive, he had worked on Orson Welles' last feature, The Other Side of the Wind, as an assistant to the cinematographer Gary Graver. And that movie's now finally been released and it's on Netflix. And so, he had this very, very impressive resume. And so I was thrilled to get him to shoot most of Cannibal Hookers. And he taught me a lot about lighting and how to enhance the lighting and how to use color gels and how to use scrims for lighting effects. So he was very, very creative and had a lot of ideas that I really appreciated.
Definitely. And speaking of cannibal hookers, I've been wanting to ask this. What is, or what was the reason you wanted to come back and do the newest Cannibal Hookers film after such a time away?
Well, it was because I thought there were a lot of possibilities for a brand new take on that idea. I didn't want to remake the same original storyline of girls trying to rush a sorority and having to pretend to be hookers, as part of
Mhm.
their initiation. I wanted a completely new story, but I just thought it was, probably one of my more popular titles, and it was just ripe for a reboot. And then we also did that with another one of my '80s movies, Savage Vengeance. We just completed a reboot of that I produced and that uh, Jake directed, that Jake Zelch directed. So those are two of my movies that we've just done reboots of.
Great. So I was lucky enough to get a chance to watch Debbie Does Demons recently. Going into that, what would you say your inspirations for that were? I noticed that it felt a little bit like more classic exploitation horror films while also taking sort of this modern take on it.
Well, what I do a lot of times with movies is I like to do a mashup of two movies I like and sort of imagine what it would be like if you crammed them together. Like when I did Shark Exorcist, it was a sort of like taking Jaws and The Exorcist and putting them together. So basically, for Debbie Does Demons, it's basically taking the Vincent Price movie Witchfinder General and mashing it together with Fright Night.
Oh yeah,
Because in Fright
definitely
Night there
saw
was a
those.
horror TV host that these teenagers go to help stop a vampire. So in my movie, it's not a horror TV host, but it's a paranormal TV host that these kids go to help them stop a witch. So it's basically that part is inspired by Fright Night. And then the whole part of the witch and everything of the Witchfinder trying to get her, that's all inspired by Witchfinder General with Vincent Price. So
Hmm.
it's basically those two. That was my starting point when I wrote it. I used that as a kickoff point, and then I just expanded it from there.
Sure. So I also noticed that you have some recurring actors recently, including Jessa Flux. How do you go about approaching actors, or do they approach you for the films, or when you find somebody, do you want to keep them on for further um, movies there as well?
Well, I've always tried to have recurrent actors, even from the early days. And I get actors all different ways. Sometimes I approach them, sometimes they approach me, sometimes they're recommended to me. I mean, for my very first movie, Demon Queen, I got my female lead through Tim Ritter. He had just made a movie, Truth or Dare, starring Mary Finero. And so Tim recommended Mary Finero to me because he had just worked with her and said she was really great. So I got her through Tim Ritter's recommendation. And then when I did my third movie, Scream Dream, I got Melissa Moore from a Nashville talent agency to be my lead, and I ended up using her in a whole series of movies. So she was my first recurring star because I used Melissa in not only Scream Dream, but then we had her in Vampire Cop. She was one of the main people in my documentary, Invasion of the Scream Queens. And then finally, when I got a really big $250,000 budget, I wanted to repay her for doing all my cheap movies. So I made sure to put her in my expensive movie when I had a big budget. So I put her in Compelling Evidence, where she co-starred with Brigitte Nielsen and Dana Plato. So we did those four movies together, and then from there, I've had a whole series of recurring actors or actresses that I've done two or more movies for. I worked on two projects with Camille Keaton. I worked one that I was a casting director on, and one that I was a director of, and then I did two movies with Jackie Hall, Dorm of the Dead, and Chainsaw Cheerleaders. I did a bunch of movies with Casper Melted Hair. She was in Hooker with a Hacksaw, Cannibal Hookers, and also in Bigfoot Exorcist. And then now I've just finished four movies in a row with Jessa Flux, and she's actually co-writing my next movie with me. So I've encouraged her, to take a more active role and not just be the star of it, but also help me create it. So we've come up with a storyline with a whole lot of great ideas from Jessa for this next movie.
Sure. What can you tell us about upcoming films as well, if anything? I know None Dead. You're working on that as well. Got to watch the preview for that and it looks excellent. So I know Shark
Yeah,
Exorcist 2 is coming out as well.
yeah, I have a lot of movies in the pipeline now that are finished that are due to come out. Like so far for 2023, I have three confirmed releases. I have Debbie Does Demons is coming out in April or May from Culture Shock Releasing, who's a partners with Vinegar Syndrome. So it'll be jointly distributed by Culture Shock and Vinegar Syndrome. Then I have two movies coming out through SRS Video that they're distributing None Dead, which I produced and co-directed, and they're also distributing the Savage Vengeance reboot starring Ronnie Jonah from Shark Exorcist and Tamara Glenn from the new Terrifier 2 movie. And that's a movie I produced and didn't direct. So I only produced it, but I also act in it. And so I have those three confirmed for release in 2023. Then I have three movies that are with Wild Eye Releasing, who's distributed several of mine before. They distributed Invasion of the Scream Queen, Shark Exorcist, and High Eight, which High Eight's one I co-directed with a lot of other directors. So I have three new movies with Wild Eye. They have Catnado, an anthology movie I produced and co-directed. They have Bigfoot Exorcist, and they have Shark Exorcist 2. And so they've not announced a release date for these yet, but they have them. And so they'll release them at some point. I just don't know when. I've encouraged them to try to get some of them out before June, because June is when I'm doing this major convention, the Bride of Godzilla, I mean, Bride of Frankencon convention with Joe Bob Briggs in Knoxville. And so I told them it would be really great if they could get them out before then, so I could be selling copies and promoting them at this huge convention in Knoxville. So I'll have to keep my fingers crossed that they get them out so that I have time to, launch them at this convention. But we'll see. But anyway, so definitely, if all the movies I have in the pipeline come out in 2023, that would be a total of 6 movies. But as it stands right now, 3 of those are confirmed for 2023, and the other 3 I can just hope.
Definitely. That's really exciting. What would you say is maybe the film that you're most excited to share with people out of those, if you can pick a favorite?
Well, I'm really excited for people to see Debbie Does Demons because I, worked the hardest on it. That's one that, we've been working on that for a few years because it has a very unusual history. I started shooting it about 3 years ago, and when we started shooting it, it had an entirely different script. And Jessa Flux wasn't the star of it at that time. She was the co-star, and the star of it was Josephus Hudson, who's an actor who was in Hooker with a Hacksaw, and also he was in Bigfoot Exorcist. And so it started out completely different, where a warlock he played was the main character. He plays a witch finder who becomes a warlock. And then he tragically passed away shortly after we filmed his scenes for Debbie Does Demons. And so we lost our main character. And so I basically completely rewrote the script. I just threw away the old script and rewrote the Debbie Does Demons completely from scratch. And we kept the scene that Josephus shot, which was a flashback scene showing him as the witch finder 300 years ago. And we kept that scene and made it an episode of the Paranormal TV Girls show. So it's like, because her show in the movie is called Debbie Does Demons. That's the name of her paranormal late night show. And so we kept Josephus' scene because it makes sense within that context. But then the whole rest of the movie had to be completely rewritten. So I have 2 complete scripts that I wrote for Debbie Does Demons, and they're both totally different. And but I am really happier with the second script. So the script we went with is the one I think having the opportunity to rewrite the script gave me a chance to really improve it, and I'm much happier with the second script than the first script. So I think in the end, it's it's a tragedy that Josephus passed away, but I do think we have a better script now. And but it's really terrible loss because he was an incredible actor. A lot of people pointed out how great he was in Hooker with a Hacksaw. He was also a celebrity wrestler. He was managed by Billy Corgan from the Smashing Pumpkins. That was his manager. And so he was a very high profile wrestler and he had way more fans. He was much better known in the wrestling community than in the movie community. In the wrestling community, he was kind of like a superstar. So it was a huge loss when he passed away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did really enjoy his performance in Hooker with a Hacksaw. We actually watched that last night to prepare for this. Really enjoyed that one as well. Um, Now you mentioned also that you've done acting in the past. I know you acted in Chicken's Blood recently as well. What would you say the biggest challenge with being in front of the camera is versus behind the camera?
Well, basically in acting, when you're shooting, some people are totally comfortable in front of a camera and some people aren't. And so I've just always been very comfortable in front of the camera. The most high pressure situation I've ever acted in was after I did my first two movies. I was hired to be the casting director and a line producer of a $350,000 35 millimeter theatrical movie that was being shot in Tennessee. And since I was the casting director, I cast myself in one of the parts. And this was a movie where they needed a couple of celebrities, and the producer who was putting up all the money had been unable to get a celebrity to agree to be in it. So I told him that I had the home phone numbers of Cameron Mitchell and Camille Keaton because I knew both of them. And so I said, well, I can call them without having to go through an agent. They'll probably want to do your movie. So I called both Cameron Mitchell, who's, did a ton of great horror movies, especially Mario Bava's Blood and Black Lace. It's like the classic he's known for. But in the 50s, he was an A-list star. He was in How to Marry a Millionaire with Marilyn Monroe. He was in Desiree with Marlon Brando. He's in movies with Jack Nicholson. He's just in just huge, huge movies. And but then when I in the 70s and 80s, he became more known as a Western and a horror star. So I got Cameron to be in it, and then I got Camille Keaton because I knew her and I had her home phone number. So with that, we had our two celebrities, and we started shooting. And then since I had an acting part in it, I put myself in sort of a high pressure situation because for me we had a 30-person crew on this, and our crew was all professional Hollywood crew that we hired off the set of Rambo 2.
Hmm.
So these people had just worked with Stallone on Rambo, nearly all of our crew. Some of them had just worked on Who Framed Roger Rabbit. So they were used to working on huge multi-million-dollar movies. And so we brought them. So they were all looking down their nose at our movie because we only had a $350,000 budget. And our crew was spoiled by working on these huge movies in LA. In fact, I told our producer he shouldn't hire these people because I said, you're setting yourself up for trouble by hiring people that are only used to working on huge movies because they're going to think your movie is beneath them. And that's what it was when he flew them all out from Los Angeles, and they all had attitudes. They all thought our movie was a piece of trash because they thought $350,000 was pocket
Hmm.
change. So they all had this nasty attitude. So it made it for a miserable shooting with people with such attitudes, and that were just thinking they were wasting their time. I
Yeah.
told him, there's plenty of good crew you could hire in Tennessee. Why don't you just hire local people that would be thrilled for the opportunity to work on your movie instead of hiring these LA people? But he came to see that I was right. He regretted hiring all these people because these people just from LA just gave him one problem after another. I mean, they tried to go on strike unless he would give them rat beer at the end of every day. They said they would go on strike if he didn't give them two or three choices of desserts for catering every lunch. They started making all these demands, and every time they make
Hmm.
a demand, they threaten to go on strike. So I said, see what a mess you've gotten yourself into by hiring
Yeah.
all these jerks. So when I did my acting role, I had to act in front of all these people that I hated because I hated basically everybody on the crew. We all hated them.
Hmm.
Everybody, all the Tennessee people hated the LA people
Yeah.
because the LA people were just assholes.
Yeah.
So it made me hate Stallone because of this working with his crew. His crew was just such nasty people. We just hated them all. So basically, I knew that since I was going to have to act in front of these people I hated, I definitely needed to do a good job because I didn't want to make any mistakes that they could criticize me for, because then I knew they would never let me live it down. So I just studied my script really hard and made sure I knew it backwards and forwards. And so when I came time to do my scene, I had it letter perfect and nailed it on the first take because I didn't want them to have any excuse to criticize me for blowing a take and costing them to have to shoot more 35 millimeter film. So I made sure that I did a good job. And even Cameron Mitchell got me aside after I did it and told me what a good job he thought I did. So that was the biggest compliment coming from somebody I really admired like him. He was from LA, but he was the only LA person I liked. so,
Yeah.
so that was like a sort of a baptism by fire to do an acting role in a movie where, you've got to get it right because if you screw up, you're really going to be in trouble.
Hmm.
And then later on, I had an even when I did this TV reality show for VH1, this TV show, Megan Wants a Millionaire. That was even more high pressure because I was being not only shot by a huge crew, but They had like sometimes a dozen cameras, and they would circle you and stand around you in a circle with 12 cameras all filming you simultaneously, and you had to act relaxed and not be nervous with all these people shooting you. Plus, this mansion we filmed in had cameras in the room, in the ceiling of every room, so no matter what room you went in except a bathroom, you were being filmed. You're being filmed while you're sleeping. So but I just got used to it really well, and that's why they cast me. They made me do all these auditions to see if I would be nervous being filmed by so many cameras, and I let them know it wouldn't bother me. So
Hmm.
there were some people on that show that freaked out at being filmed by so many cameras, but I just totally tried to roll with it. And so that was a very good another trial by fire for for
Yeah,
acting.
definitely. Would you say that you've run into behind the camera for this way, people that you've had issues with when you've been filming, sort of like you described with like people being pushy or not wanting to sort of read their lines or anything like that?
No, usually the actors I hire when I'm in charge, when I do one of my own movies, I'm usually in charge of putting the crew together. So I usually try to get people that we can get along with. When I did Compelling Evidence, we had to have about a 20-person crew on that, and so we had to hire a lot of people from the Atlanta area that I'd never worked with before because that was the first time I was needing to personally hire a full crew. I knew I didn't want to do what the money man did on No Justice and hire all these LA people, so I made a point to hire all the only Georgia crew that worked on Georgia movies because we're filming in the Atlanta area so that they wouldn't have LA attitudes. But even then, shooting with Georgia crew, a lot of them had Georgia attitudes. We had
Hmm.
a $250,000 budget, and a lot of people still look down their nose at our movie because, as you may know, Georgia is now one of the biggest film centers in America,
Hmm.
and they make huge movies in Georgia. I mean, they make quite a lot of the Marvel superhero movies. They made Zombieland with Woody Harrelson. There's just one big movie after another constantly being made in Georgia. So yeah, I ran into that problem again a little bit with a few of the people because they had snobby attitudes because they had been working on multi-million-dollar movies in Georgia.
Hmm. Yeah.
So it's sometimes hard to escape these people with bad attitudes.
Definitely. No, Mr. Farmer, sort of wrapping up here. Before I let you go here, just I know fans of yours, including myself, we all have favorites of your filmography here. But say someone's new to your body of work, what would you say are maybe the two or three films that you would say is the best introduction to what you've made?
Well, when Debbie Does Demons comes out this spring, I would say definitely that one, and then
Mm-hmm.
I think Hooker with a Hacksaw and the new Cannibal Hookers. I'm really happy with those. And then from my older movies, I think the original Cannibal Hookers and then I like Compelling Evidence, the one I did with my version of an all-star female cast where I had Brigitte Nielsen, Dana Plato, Melissa Moore from my own movies, and then I had Lynn Lowry from Cat People, I Drink Your Blood, and David Cronenberg Shivers. So that's one I was really pleased with how Compelling Evidence turned out, especially since it was such a high pressure situation filming that one under. Whenever I do these big movies where I have major investors, and I've done a few, I did quite a lot of those in the 90s and early 2000s or early O's, whatever you call it, where, we'd have these big producers. And so when you're shooting with people with giving you $100,000 or dollars and up, they usually want you to shoot on a traditional schedule. They want you to shoot like 5 or 6 days a week, shoot like a 12 to hour or longer day. And so it's just like a, job where you're just doing it every day. But when I shoot my own movies, I like to shoot a more relaxed schedule, maybe just like 2 days here, and then in a couple of weeks we'll shoot another 2 days. So I like to stretch it out more when I'm doing it.
Definitely.
But I would say some of my earlier movies, I like the original Cannibal Hookers and the movie I made in Paris, France. It was always a big hope that I could maybe someday shoot a movie in Europe, and so this movie I made in Europe 22 years ago, an erotic vampire in Paris with Misty Mundy. I like that one a lot.
Hmm.
We had a French crew for that, but we had a small French crew. That movie showed that you can get a lot accomplished with a tiny crew, that you don't need 20 people. When I did that in France, I hired a husband and wife to be my two-person French crew, And so just working with me and my two-person crew, we got everything done and it turned out great. So that movie really showed you don't need a huge crew to get a lot done.
Definitely. Well, Mr. Farmer, thank you for sitting down with me today. This has been a great conversation. I'm really looking forward to all the new projects you have coming down the road. Definitely going to be reviewing them on the channel too. So I just really appreciate you sitting down with me today. I'm a huge fan, so this has been great. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate you inviting me and thank you.
Thanks.